Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 159, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
And me, Ravi Abbott.
I like it when we record in the evenings, because this week we're doing this at like 8 o'clock at night, and I've actually been quite excited to come in and do this week's show.
Yeah, we've been doing lots of mornings with the Australian ones recently, haven't we? So
and the fact that I've been at home wallpapering all day as well, which actually gets me out of doing that for an hour or two, which is quite nice. And you've been messing around with mini disc players.
I've been messing around with mini disc players indeed. After last week, I purchased a kind of mini disc separate unit, and then somebody messaged me instantly on Discord and said, "Oh, I've got a spare mini disc player." I was like, "Oh God!" So now I've got another one arriving, so I've got to try and get rid of that. If anybody wants a mini disc player, contact me.
Ravi's got them coming out of his ears.
Yeah.
I love it when stuff like that happens, because we did do like a chat about mini discs last week, and you jumped straight out on eBay and bought one.
Oh, totally.
I often do that when we're chatting about subjects on the show. I'm like, "Oh, let's have a look on Amazon." Then I got all these surprise parcels turn up in the week, and I'm like, I don't remember ordering that. I'm like, yeah. I did need to stand for my PlayStation 2.
Well, I've got it set up at the moment, recording tracks at home.
But today, interestingly, talking about mini disc, if you thought that was an obscure format in 2019, I've got to tell you about this techno DJ from Germany who's released a new album on possibly the coolest and today quite an obscure platform that not many people are bringing out albums for. Could be a bit of a first, actually, because today is actually quite an audio episode, isn't it? We're going to be talking a lot about music today.
Oh, totally. We've got Frank Klepacki on, and he's like one of the best video game composers in history. I just love his stuff. When I was a kid, his stuff totally changed, and it changed gaming at the time that the technology was changing. So the sound card was coming in, your sound blaster, you had your CD-ROM, you could actually get like hardcore bass lines on there. And Frank was a fan of Nine Inch Nails, all the metal stuff. So he was the main video game composer for Westwood. So he did the Dune 2 soundtrack, and then
Blade Runner.
Yeah, he did Blade Runner. And then, of course, Command & Conquer, which was just absolutely amazing. And to the point that he did Red Alert, he did Red Alert 2, Red Alert 3, and now he's doing the Command & Conquer remake soundtrack.
We need to ask him about that.
Oh, yes. And he did live performances. If you've not seen this is the coolest thing ever. He did Command & Conquer live, and he had this like Prince-style guitar that he's got, which is just beautiful. And he had this big, Nod, who were the enemy forces in Command & Conquer. He had this huge robe on and like an orchestra behind him. And he's just
rocking it.
And he created the Hell March, which is one of the most famous soundtracks. It's actually become a meme now. If you've seen the Pikachus marching to the Hell March.
Well, it's one of the most iconic video game soundtracks ever, isn't it?
Oh, totally.
And the cool thing about him is he's so versatile too. He's not all Nine Inch Nails. He did Disney's Lion King soundtrack as well.
Oh, yeah, of course. And also some Star Wars stuff, because he's a massive Star Wars fan.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's done some good games with them.
And MTV adverts.
Adverts, so much. It's going to be a great interview, this one.
Yeah, Frank Klepacki is our guest. He's coming up on the Retro Hour podcast in around 15 minutes from now. We've got some good news to talk about this week as well. I mentioned the PlayStation 2, my little stand that I bought for it this week. I did get one of those, actually. The little kind of like really light blue little stands.
Yeah.
I saw one of those in a picture and I thought, I haven't got a stand for mine, so I bought one off eBay. But I'm actually set my PS2 up again recently, which is good timing because there has been a port of something really cool to the PlayStation 2 that we'll chat about in a minute. And also, we're going to have a lot to think about what retro gaming will be like in 20 years from now. Something to start thinking about there, Ravi.
Oh, I think they'll still have Cracktros.
Yeah, bring back Cracktros. Before we do all that, though, let's give a big shout to our favourite people ever. The people who allow us to come in here and talk to you about stuff like mini discs and PlayStation 2s and future of retro gaming. And that is people who make a donation into the running of the Retro Hour podcast. Just like this week, making the Hall of Fame,
Stephen and Gillian Murphy,
Lucas Porhashimi,
Michael Stoofs,
and Jarno Milikinen, who all made donations into the running of the show. And if you'd like to do the same, honestly, every penny, every cent, every euro, every dollar that we get goes 100% back into the running of the show. And let's just keep doing this podcast week in, week out. We accept PayPal, a few ways you can donate. You'll find all of that in the support section of the retrohour.com, and it is massively appreciated. And you will get a mention on a future episode of the show. Well, let's talk about the PlayStation 2. Do you use RetroArch?
I use RetroArch all the time, and I use a thing called Beetlejuice, which is basically the PS2 on RetroArch on the PC.
Right.
And it has so many cool little functions, like you can basically add in anti-aliasing, you can add in all these extra effects, so your PS2 games can actually look better than they do on the PS2 using all your fancy PC graphics card stuff.
I think that's awesome when you see that as well, because, I mean, you think of those kind of old 3D games, because they're all polygon-based, I guess all they have to do is like improve the maths a bit and put more polygons in or make them higher res.
Yeah, and there's this thing called Steam ROM Manager. So if you download Steam ROM Manager, it scans all your ROMs, it connects to RetroArch, and then it creates launchers for them in Steam, so you can actually just launch a game straight through Steam, and it even skips the PlayStation logo, and you can just go straight into the game.
Oh, I like the PlayStation logo.
Yeah, same here. I leave it on.
Well, the reason we're talking about this is, I mean, if you don't use RetroArch, it's essentially a front end for emulators, isn't it?
Yeah, and it supports a lot of emulators. Like, it's all the cores are basically on there, and you can get individual cores and then kind of change the specification and launch them using little shortcuts on the launchers and stuff.
Even little icons and stuff, so they look really nice. Well, it has been ported to the PlayStation 2, which I thought was really cool. Now, if you've got a modded PlayStation 2, now the PS2 is like ridiculously easy to mod these days, isn't it? You can soft mod them, for next to nothing. And this guy, his name is F.J. Trudley. He started porting this to the PlayStation 2. As of version 1.7.6, you can already try RetroArch on your own homebrew-enabled PS2. Now, it's obviously an early release on the PlayStation 2, but already there's a few things he's put in there. You've got a NES emulator, two different ones, Quick NES, and one called FCEUMM. And there's one called Pico Drive as well, which is the Mega Drive/Genesis emulator as well. And apparently these run at a pretty good speed. Now, he's recommended a few little optimizations you can do, because obviously it's early days of this port.
Yeah, you kind of have to do certain tweaks for the PlayStation, I guess. And
yeah, the V-Sync's got to be on, for example, on Quick NES to get good performance and everything. But it also means that you can, kind of load up all your ROMs and stuff on here too, because the PlayStation 2's got a hard disk in it.
Ah, yes. They're saying on this one you actually run it off the USB.
Yeah.
But I can imagine in the later version, there was that hard disk slot at the back, wasn't there?
On the fat.
Yeah, so you could probably fill it up with all your games and then just launch them off there in the future.
Because the bad thing about the PlayStation 2 was the USB slot, I think, was USB 1.1.
Ah,
so
okay,
not the quickest in the world.
Yeah.
So having a hard disk solution would be a lot more useful, I think. But again, I mean, it is a first ever port of this here. The fact that he's got it up and running and the legwork's been done to get it running on the PlayStation. Because running emulation on the original Xbox, it's a brilliant platform to run, like, all the classic games on. I've got a modded Xbox with like a 500 gigabyte hard disk in with loads of MAME titles on there, Super Nintendo, Mega Drive, everything on there. So I think more people have PlayStation 2s gathering dust probably than Xboxes in their cupboard.
Yeah, you can basically push that to some crazy limits, can't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I've even got like Nintendo 64 stuff running on the original Xbox, which it copes with some games all right, but not others.
And did it do 720p as well?
Yeah, it can do 720p out. But I mean, you can even get 720p out of the PlayStation 2 if you've got component cables. So the thing about it is, I mean, I love the fact that they're kind of repurposing this old hardware and giving it kind of a new lease of life, because like I said, a lot of these machines, you pick them up for next to nothing. I mean, how much is a PlayStation 2 now? Like, what, 15 quid?
Yeah, if you go to cash converters and see one, and then you can use that as your solution for lots of machines and have all your other ones pristine on a shelf.
Well, there's this good website here called LibRetro, and they're talking, actually, there's been a couple of other RetroArch ports. They've done a PlayStation 4 port of it as well. It's in the works at the moment. You need to have a jailbroken PS4, obviously. An Xbox One port's just been released as well, if you've got a modded Xbox One. And they've even ported this, I thought was really cool, to the Apple TV.
Yes, because the Apple TV have famously been jailbroken. And
well, apparently you can run this
long time
on non-jailbroken Apple TVs. They've found a way of doing it. So I've got an Apple TV in the bedroom. We've got a TV bed.
Oh, God.
Have you ever seen these?
No, I've not.
Well, I had to convince the missus to buy this last year when we moved. So it's a bed, looks like a normal bed, and it's got like this kind of like cover at the end of the bed, and you've got a little remote control. You press it, and then a TV rises out the end of the bed.
I'm going to come and kick your wife out.
Well, you want to get in bed with me, right?
Yeah.
That's not
play
weird.
some RetroArch.
We're going to get talked about now. But it is really cool to like watch TV and stuff in bed. But I was saying the other day to her, I wasn't feeling too well one day last week, and I went to bed in the afternoon. I said, I might bring my Xbox in here and plug it in. She goes, no, you're bloody not. That's how it starts.
That's the decline, yeah.
So, yeah, I think maybe I'll have to get RetroArch installed on that.
Yeah, it's amazing because you think of all the titles that came out for the PS2, and there were so many good ones, like Burnout. I've been playing that one, that Burnout Takedown, and Simpsons Hit and Run and stuff. There was some great games.
Well, I was thinking the other day, it's the reason I've got I've got this little stand for the PS2. I've got it set up again in my home office. I've only lived there about 4 months. I'm already starting to fill my space in my room, as you'd imagine. But I've got it set up on my desk now, so I wanted to stand for it, and I thought, it would be really cool to play some of those games again, because I haven't given my PS2 much love for a few years now. Really.
Yeah, it was a really good console.
Now, another one I might need to set up again that's currently in my cupboard, shock horror, and it's one of my favourite systems ever, the Sega Mega Drive. Now, can you believe this? There's going to be an album released by a German techno DJ on a Mega Drive cartridge.
Yeah, so this guy, Remute, he's been around the scene for quite a long time, and he's actually done a lot of floppy disk releases before. I was talking to him last year on Facebook.
Cool.
And this is awesome, because it looks like he's now somehow managed to release a tune on a Mega Drive cart, which is just insane.
Well, this is called Techno-Optimistic or Techno-Optimistic LP. And yeah, he's releasing the full album on an actual Mega Drive cartridge that you can plug into your original machine. He calls it the first plug-and-play techno album. So you put it in, and the way it works is it's not recorded music on the cartridge.
Okay.
It's actually programmed with software that directly addresses the Yamaha sound chip in the Mega Drive console itself.
That's smart.
To generate the music. Yeah, so, it's not very big, It's only 4 megabytes, I think. There's a flash RAM chip in here. Do you want to hear a little bit of it?
Yeah, I know his music's proper banging, isn't it?
That is instantly recognisable as Mega Drive, though, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, it's got that rolling kind of,
It's quite chill techno, actually. It's quite nice. Now, this is out now, and I'll put a link in our show notes as well. Now, obviously, the main thing about this is he recommends that you listen to it on a Mega Drive Model 1. Because you remember that had the stereo output, didn't it, from the headphone jack? The Model 2 will work, and even if you've got one of the clones or anything, probably don't try it on that games console.
I think there'll be like a 32X remix.
But the thing about it is because there's different variants of the Mega Drive, they all kind of generate audio a little bit differently. So he's designed it for a Model 1, which is my favourite model of the Mega Drive anyway. But I think that's really awesome that he's doing that actual full album by a professional musician released on a Mega Drive cartridge.
And I guess if he uses that, because that's a Yamaha chip, he could do that on the Game Boy as well, on a few other things as well that used it.
Didn't the Atari ST had a Yamaha chip in there, I think?
I think so.
One of the Spectrums.
I don't know if it's the same one, but...
no, it's not, no, but yeah.
There might be some commands that kind of hit the same bits,
Yeah, you want to blast it out on your Game Boy on the bus, don't you? You're one of them kids at the back of the bus.
Oh, yeah, I used to have this program called Nano Loops, which was like a little tracker for Game Boy, and you could just sit there like, doo, 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 and people would just stare at you.
Everyone tutting on the bus. Yeah. Now, let's talk about GameStop. It's a brand that we haven't got here in the UK, but we did actually go to the one in Athlone, didn't we, when we were over there the other week?
And I went over to the ones in America as well and saw them, and the ones in America were a lot of people in the queuing up for the PlayStation Classic going, why haven't I got a power adapter in here? And then GameStop going, well, you can buy our power adapters.
For a reasonable $20.
Yeah.
But GameStop, it's a very popular brand around the world. Whenever I'm abroad in like place like Italy, for example, or Spain, we often try, I convince the missus to pop in for 5 minutes, just have a look, and then pick up a load of games and realise, actually, these are all in Italian. I'm not going to be able to play them at home. But they have been going through the best time over the last couple of years. And it kind of does mirror the situation that we've had here in the UK. We've had like Game, which is our big game shop on the high street.
So they're not connected at all?
No, they're not yet. Different companies. But here in the UK, we had Game, who bought out Game Station, that was another brand. I really love Game Station here in the UK. Game went through a lot of trouble, went into administration, got rescued. I think it was about 2 years ago now, wasn't it? They're closing a lot of them down, though, even in our city. The main one on the Market Square, Nottingham, went a few months ago, didn't it?
Yeah.
But GameStop had the same issue. Now, last year they kind of, admitted they were in big financial trouble. And they've been looking for an acquisition. So they've been in talks with a few companies to invest money in them. And it looked like it was going to happen at the back end of last year. But they had a real big problem earlier on in the year when they got a CEO, Michael Mauler, his name was, who stayed at the company only 3 months before he quit.
Oh, gosh.
Which is doesn't inspire confidence in any board, does it? Let's be honest. But it turns out after having those two main companies they were talking to, who went in, did a big look at the company, explored all of its assets and future business plans, and essentially decided to pull out and said, look, we don't think it's a viable business. So they released this press release that essentially says, look, we haven't got a buyer. It's not looking good for them.
Because I remember the main thing that I was seeing about GameStop was a few years ago they'd started refurbishing consoles.
Yeah.
And they'd started reselling like older games and older consoles and Dreamcasts and stuff like that. So I thought maybe, they might be riding the retro wave a little bit, but that's not good good prediction so far, is it?
Yeah, well, they've got 7,000 shops, I think, in total. So, it's
yeah, and if that's a worldwide brand as well.
Yeah. I mean, apparently after, the announcement, their stock has hit a 14-year low this week. So, well, it kind of leads to a more, I guess, a wider reaching conversation. I mean, I was watching a video by, there's a guy on YouTube called Review Tech USA who covers a lot of news and stuff, one of my favourite channels. And he was talking about this, and he's got kids, and he said, it kind of makes him a bit sad that his kids are never going to experience going to Toys R Us, for example.
I don't think that's the case, to be honest. I think they are going to happen, but I think at the moment it's all about getting the profit, and they're not really aiming in the right direction, and they haven't got the community aspect. Like, one thing that I saw was, I know this is modern tech, sorry about that, but one thing I saw was when I was in America was I went to the Apple store.
Yeah.
The Apple store was very much sell, buy, sell. I went to the Windows store, and in the Windows stores, the guys came up to me and asked, like, oh, what job you doing? What? And they were recommending free software. Which I was like, wait, these guys aren't doing the hard stuff.
Microsoft doing that?
Yeah. And it seemed that they were getting a lot more kind of customers, and it had more of that community feel. So I just think they might have lost direction a bit when it comes to regards of gaming. I think there's still money to be made, definitely, and retail spaces and places, but...
Well, I think you might be right in a way there, because when I'm in, I pop into game and stuff like that when I'm in town, and I like the experience of being in a shop and just, you probably did the same when you were a teenager. You'd wander in, electronics boutique and just for a nose around. You might not buy anything, which I guess doesn't make the company's money if everyone just does that, but... I like the experience of going into a shop. But whenever I'm in there, though, you don't see, kids hanging out in there and stuff like that.
No, there's not time to stop and chat. Like, the best thing that they had in the Microsoft store was one side, and it was just full of Minecraft, and all the kids were on there. And that instantly gave it that feel of, when we were kids in the 90s and we were there, and there'd be a demonstration unit, and you'd be on Tony Hawk's for 4 hours until they kick you out the shop,
Yeah.
And... it kind of just feels a bit like Asda at the moment. It doesn't feel like...
Yeah, you're right.
A shop. And guaranteed when you went into, our independent game shops, Playtime, probably every single time you were in there, you'd pick up a game, even if it was a smaller one. But I just go into game, look around and go,
Yeah, same here. Leave a bit, same. I've seen it last week. But I think they need to maybe bring the fun back somehow. I mean, you mentioned the Apple shop there, which is a good example. You walk in there, it's always packed there when everyone's on the iPads and the phones and messing about with them. Well, you go to Game over here, for example, you've maybe got an Xbox set up and a PlayStation 4, and that's it, 2 in the whole shop.
Yeah.
And they're locked away in those glass cabinets, and they've got one game running on it. If you had kids in there, on a weekend, having, loads of game consoles all set up and having
Well, I've
fun.
seen, attempted stars at the demo units, but they're never really attended, and they're kind of broken. And there's not a hype man there like you used to have in the 90s.
Come on, kids, have a go.
Yeah.
Sonic 2's on here. Wow. Yeah, you'd love it, though. I'd spend
I
hours
remember the Virgin stores being like that. The Virgin stores, it was an experience. When I was a kid, I'd go downstairs. They used to have this in Nottingham. I don't know if they had it everywhere else. They had this tube system.
Right.
So they'd have an order, and then they'd put it in a little plastic tube, and then they'd put it in this pipe, and the pipe would suck the tube like a vacuum.
A pneumatic tube kind of thing.
Yeah, and it would go va-dum all the way, and you could watch the tube go around the store, and then someone else would pick that up, and it would be like the game order, and it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen,
You're just buying games just to see them go through there. And Dad, give me your credit card again.
Yeah, and then you had the cool vinyl people upstairs, and there was, and it was having that kind of fun experience, and it just feels a bit retail-y.
Yeah, boring now, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the thing. I mean, I think the experience of walking into and I find GameStop the same, because it's pretty similar to Game in my experience from being in there. You walk
I think
in
it was
there,
a bit better than Game, to be honest, actually.
Yeah, but not that much better.
No,
not enough to keep them going, obviously,
Yeah.
by the looks of it. But it's no more exciting than buying a game off Steam. Really, yeah. It needs to be something else to get you in there and keep people in the shop.
But then I go to a retro show and I'll be like, I've got to buy this, whatever it is, and I'll come out with more stuff than I can carry, you know?
So in the moment, it's like, you can even buy like your grocery shopping on Amazon at the moment. It's like we're all going to end up like, those fat people on trolleys in Wally. It's going to be like that in the future, isn't it? There's nothing left on the house.
No, I like to feel my vegetables before I purchase them.
Give that banana a good squeeze. Right now, before we get into our guest this week, Frank Klepacki, this is going to be such a good one. We did get a little comment, actually. Someone sent us this link on the retro gaming section of Reddit. Another little discussion point, actually. What do you think retro gaming will be like in 20 years? I guess that kind of follows on from my last little point there in a way. Insofar as if everything goes digital, there's not going to be anything to collect, for example.
Yeah. I think we don't know what it's going to be like in 20 years because I know you say everything goes digital and we'll lose it, but then there's great projects like archive.org and other kind of things that, before I would have thought, like with the internet when it was so throwaway, like everything going, I thought, there wouldn't be anything. But I think there is the guys that are going to keep it alive, but it's like, is this going to be the period that changed everything? Was this the period, the 8-bit to kind of the modern games? And was that the period that changed everything? Or is there going to be something insane coming up in a few years? And that's going to be the retro gaming that everyone in the future looks at. I don't know.
I mean, we are kind of going into the unknown. I mean, one thing I did notice in terms of, the Wii store shut down recently on the original Nintendo Wii. So anything you bought on there digitally is gone. You can't ever get it again.
You can.
Oh, okay.
Watch Modern Vintage Gamer's latest video.
Right.
Someone's downloaded the whole of the Wii store.
Okay.
And you can actually put it back onto your console and have like a copy of it, yeah.
So like you were saying a minute ago, like archive.org, and essentially, it's down the community to archive these games and give you... Well, that's reassuring, actually, if that's the case. I mean, some people here are talking about, people that were born like around the millennium, for example. Their retro is going to be like Xbox 360 and PS2 and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And they're talking here that one interesting point is whether consoles will be collectible. Because, I mean, you look at stuff like the PS2, Dreamcast and GameCube and the Xbox, for example, most of the library came out on all of those platforms. And now, pretty much all games are multi-plat. There's not that many, like, exclusives for certain systems these days. So it might make hardware collecting a bit less relevant in the future.
Yeah, it's weird, because if you look at stuff like pinball machines and arcade machines, that's a specific one game, isn't it, for the machine? And that's what makes it valuable, that you've got the Addams Family arcade or you've got this, but... If it's just a PlayStation that plays generic, I don't know. Who knows? Maybe there'll be a huge market for it. Maybe there'll be the antiques. There'll be like guys like Lovejoy in their shops,
That's your future.
Yeah,
perfect the dodgy accent.
That's it.
But see, I know like a kid. He's like, well, I call him a kid. He's like about 22. My sister-in-law's boyfriend, and he's like I said, he's 22. He's a young lad, and he's really into 1960s cars.
Yeah.
Before his time. And people in this thread are going, when we're like old and that, no one will care about stuff like the Mega Drive and the SNES. But I think, younger people are coming into it all the time or are interested in looking throughout the
history. Yeah, it's kind of like a loop. When you get older, you get into stuff like writing complaint letters to newspapers and stuff like this and collecting old cars. Yeah.
You haven't started that, Ravi, sure.
No, not yet.
Penning to the Nottingham Post.
I do read them for a laugh, though.
There is actually a Facebook group called Angry People in Local Papers.
Oh, yeah. We used to, our teacher used to go, if you want a bad example of poetry, our English teacher, he said, look in the local paper and read some of those poems.
Now, we will have more news on next week's podcast. It will be out on Friday, of course. Now, let's get serious about retro gaming. This one's going to be so interesting. We are joined by the legend that is Frank Klepacki, video game composer for Westwood Studios, MTV, worked on games like Dune 2, Blade Runner, of course, Command & Conquer, Lion King. Let's get into this week's special guest. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is the bit we've been waiting for. Time to welcome on this week's amazing guest. Welcome to the show, Frank Klepacki.
Hello there, how are you? Good to be on. Thanks, guys.
Very good, thank you, Frank. Now, before we get into your time at Westwood Studios, games like Blade Runner, the C&C series, Star Wars. I mean, I was reading that your parents got you a drum kit when you were a kid to get you started. How did you convince them to buy you a drum kit then?
Well, my parents were musicians too, so they were, playing professionally around Las Vegas, where I grew up and still live. And So my dad played guitar, my mom played bass. They both sang. And they played in a lot of different Vegas casinos and whatnot, and lounges, and had different bands over the years. So I was always sort of around that environment because I would see their rehearsals all the time. I would hear them working stuff out. And eventually they would try to show me things here and there. When I first tried to pick up a guitar, being a small guy, little guy, it wasn't grabbing me at the time because it was just really hard. Guitar is probably one of the tougher instruments to learn how to play. So I was like, I don't know about that, so eventually I said, I want to learn something, but what is it? What's going to be my thing? And I finally arrived at the idea of playing on drums because I thought in my mind as a kid, oh yeah, you just gotta beat the crap out of those things, right? That's got to be easier than trying to play guitar. But my parents were like, okay, we'll get you a drum set for Christmas, but under one condition: you have to take lessons once a week for an entire year. And if you decide after that you don't want to continue, then that's fine. We can always sell the kit, but we want you to at least give it a fair shot. Actually learn how to play it, actually, learn something about the instrument so that you can make an educated decision about whether or not you want to pursue it. So I appreciate that they did that because I, did exactly that. Took private lessons for a year and I just had so much fun with it. It made me want to play along to everything on the radio and develop my musical tastes and all of that. So that was really a big part of it.
I think there's something about being a young boy as well. I think, the drums are like the holy grail in music, aren't they? Because I know when I was a kid, I really wanted to play the drums at school in music class, but everyone wanted to play the drums. So in the end, my teacher put me through a few other instruments first. I played the trombone for like 3 years, so I'm actually pretty good at the trombone now. Never got onto the drums though.
Yeah, I mean, when you're trying to take band classes in school, there is that where they try to place you, in certain instruments because they're trying to do where they think the kids are going to best fit that class. But for me, I had the advantage immediately of already being a drummer. So when I'd go in and say, yeah, I'm already playing and I already have a kid at home and I already have lessons and already doing this. So, okay, well, obviously we're going to have you on drums. That's a no-brainer. So it was just, and that came easy to me because I had such a head start at a young age, through high school, all of that. It was that was just the easy A for me.
Well, when you first started kind of programming BASIC and playing lots of other video games, did you start to hear soundtracks or drumming in that you'd kind of really get into?
Yeah, it wasn't until that I was exposed to the workings of Westwood Studios and took an interest in that I kind of put that together in my mind of I think I could do this because before that it was more about just wanting to be in a band and write original music with a band, go tour the world, sell 1 million albums, be famous, all of that fun stuff, aspirations you have when you're a kid, because that was kind of the thing. I was really into music. I'd go to concerts all the time, and I just said, that's what I want to do someday, and so that was kind of my early, aspirations once I got out of school. But as it turned out, having the opportunity to grow with the video game industry because I started not only young, but started at a young point for the industry in itself too. The very first game I worked on was on the original Nintendo Entertainment System. And that wasn't a far stretch from the Tandy 1000 in my mind because it's a 3-voice, monophonic polyphony thing. So it was the same thing. I've got a bass line, I've got 2 melody lines, I can put in a little white noise drum behind it, and then the sound effects would take up the other channels. So I immediately knew that I could jump into that and do something like that. And then every single year, technology just would increase, and I would keep developing as we went. It was basically, being at Westwood was my college. You didn't have classes for video game development back then. You just had sort of general purpose education for, there's music production, or there's programming, or there's this, or there's that, but nothing specific to video game development. You really had to be into it and just get your hands dirty with whatever tech was coming out, and that was a really expansive time with, every year a new technology would come out that we would have to learn and adapt to and make the most out of.
Well, that Tandy 1000 machine you just talked about then, I mean, I know that was kind of considered one of the best MS-DOS PCs of the era. Why did you want to get it then, and how did that machine eventually end up in your house?
Well, back then, anytime I was exposed to people that had computers, I was immediately taken with it. Playing on friends' Apple IIs and 2Es and 2Cs and Macintosh, the early ones. And so, I was enthralled with that. And then my parents had a friend who was also into computers and playing games. And so every time we went to their house, I would play on their system. And he actually had the Tandy 1000, and then he was going to upgrade to a better computer after a while. And so he offered to sell it to my parents for me. And so, they got it at a good price. And so they said, okay, yeah. So they got it, and I started messing with it from there.
Well, when you joined Westwood, you joined as a games tester. Was that not as exciting as you kind of thought, because you moved later on into the audio department? Yeah,
well, as a teenager, the idea of getting paid to play video games sounds pretty damn awesome. So I was like, yeah, that'd be great. So I went and did that. And, and once I kind of learned the ropes of what's really involved, then, the luster of that initial thought kind of dwindled a bit, because, you realize that there is some work involved. You're not just playing the game and getting paid for it. You actually are trying to physically break the game at every turn. So your goal when you get into the office is not to just play through the game. Your goal is to play it every single way you can think of that doesn't make any sense, or that you shouldn't be allowed to do certain things you should try to do, and just do crazy stuff to try to break it. That's your goal. It's not to get through the level. It's to do everything in the level that is possible or not possible, and then report what your findings are. You're supposed to fill out a what we called a bug sheet, or bug report, and you would write down the severity of the bug. Like, is it like a game breaker? Does it crash the game? That's number one. And then number two would be, well, it's a eyesore, like it's an obvious glitch in the art, or, something that just stands out. And then like down the tiers from there would just be something minor, like, oh yeah, the sound effect doesn't play when I do this, or, there's a missing texture somewhere, or things like that. So you'd write down these reports and hand them in, and then the programmers would fix it and then send it back to you. And then you'd have to try to reproduce it again just to verify that it was fixed. So it's a lot of back and forth in that way. And that's kind of how testing works, or quality assurance works. And then you just rinse and repeat. You do the same exact thing the next day and the next day. And every time there's a new part of the game that's done or needs testing, then you go through that level or that mission or whatever the case may be. So yeah, I would get distracted, and wander around and talk to people, because I was just really interested in the process, not because I didn't want to do the job. It was just like, okay, well, I know what this is about now. And so on my break, I would go and talk to the artists, or talk to designers, or talk to, the audio director, and just ask questions about what they did and how it all worked. And I was just very interested.
So, I mean, around that time, you mentioned like working on the NES and stuff like that. Do you think that was a really exciting time for like the emerging new technologies that were coming along? Because there was such big leaps in computing power, and especially in audio as well. I imagine that really started to improve pretty rapidly.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like I was kind of touching on a little bit earlier. Starting from that, like the very next thing I worked on after that was, PC games and Genesis games. So then that immediately jumped from, a 3-voice monophonic FM synthesis to 6 voices. So I was like, okay, now I've got more to work with. Oh, now I can make instrument changes and program it a bit more.
Nice. Do you remember using or hearing the first kind of sampling? And doing that because you did Lion King as well.
Yeah, we did that on the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. But on the Super Nintendo specifically, we had to sample all of the instruments into that console, because that's the way that worked. And so that was a pretty big challenge, because you had very limited amount of space for the samples themselves. Like we had to fit everything into like 11K or something stupid like that, and so it was trying to get it crammed into such a small space, but still try to maintain a sense of quality. So, I was experimenting with, different instruments that I could sample that would get the point across that I wanted efficiently and, but not sound horribly artifacted. So it was just, that was a balance that we needed to achieve.
Well, on the PC side of things around that time, I mean, obviously you had a bit more room to play with, I guess, on the PC, but also when stuff like Adlib came along, I mean, that must have been really good. I mean, did you have to kind of make different soundtracks for one game because of like Adlib and Sound Blaster and that kind of thing?
Not really. So, Adlib card was the first PC card that I was using, and that's I was using their visual composer program along with their instrument maker program. So everything I did was centric to the Adlib card and the Adlib software. That translated perfectly over to the Sound Blaster cards because they basically all use the same FM synthesis chip. So did the Sega Genesis. So actually it was everything would port over and sound pretty much identical. In fact, we had a converter program from the PC MIDI files that we created with all of the information of the instrumentation and whatnot that ported over to the Sega Genesis GEMS development system. And again, it had the same chip in it, with the exception of the fact that it had sample playback on one channel, so I could actually use real drum samples instead of the FM synthesis drums. So I made that adjustment when we did, like, say, Dune for the Genesis versus the PC and whatnot. But I also utilized the Roland MT32 and Sound Canvas MIDI modules as well, so that people who are audiophiles that had higher end playback for music in a PC format would be able to take advantage of that too. So we clambered onto that pretty early on as well.
It must have been great getting MIDI support as well, because you could kind of hook up your real instruments and start playing with them.
So that came a bit later, though, because when I first was starting out, even on those kinds of cards and development systems, I was still very much in the box. I was kind of doing everything by hand and not really performing it with a MIDI keyboard so much. It wasn't until we got into a bit more advanced technology. I started using Cubase when it made the jump to the PC from the Atari ST, and that became my main DAW, which I still use today. I've been a Cubase user for life ever since then. But when I started using that, then it became apparent that I could take advantage of using MIDI control much more efficiently, with a MIDI keyboard, and using all of the hardware sounds that we could start acquiring as we went towards making the jump into streaming music that would be played back via 22K wave files, the first of which was The Legend of Kyrandia 3, and then immediately followed by Command and Conquer.
Well, when creating music for Dune 2, how much did you have to kind of reference the original? And being one of the first kind of RTS games, how important was that atmosphere?
So when we got to doing Dune 2, I was very much influenced musically by the original film that came out in the 80s, the Toto soundtrack, and the Brian Eno stuff, and then also the other Dune game that was being developed by Creo. We were under Virgin at the time. We had just got bought by Virgin Interactive Entertainment, and they were already doing another Dune game with Creo at the time. So that's why we called ours Dune 2, just because, it was simultaneous development, but ours was going to come out a bit later, but it was going to be a different kind of a game too. So in fact, it's basically known as the first real-time strategy game, to really hit. So yeah, it was just one of those things where I took those musical influences, kind of hybridized them together, kind of made my own voice with it, because they didn't really tell me to stick to one thing specifically. They just I had a fair amount of creative freedom in those days to just kind of do whatever I felt, as long as it fit. that's really how that came about. And I remember taking advantage of every MIDI thing I could do, with the ad lib card and the instrument changes and tempo changes, and just there were so many hand added control changes into those scores. I mean, it just looked like a mess when you looked at it at a glance. It was just like, what is all of this stuff that's in here? But that was just me taking full advantage of the hardware that we had available.
I mean, you mentioned about, that being like an early RTS game. And the thing about it is, I mean, RTS games, unlike a lot of games at the time, were designed to be played for a very long time. I mean, we all had that friend who, like, you wouldn't see him for like 4 days because he'd been indoors playing Dune 2, like, for an entire week.
Totally. Yeah,
well,
they definitely were addictive.
Well, the fact that you got this music playing, I mean, how would you make sure that the tune would not get too repetitive and the music wouldn't drive people mad?
Well, it was just a matter of having enough of variety of the music in there that, and assign them to the different missions so that, they would get mixed up and you'd have a variety of the different themes, whether you were just, creating your base or getting into combat. So I think that the score was dynamic enough in the way that I composed it, along with the amount of variety that we offered, that it didn't get old, because there was enough there that could keep your ear interested. Even if you did recognize stuff after a while or start memorizing stuff after a while, it wasn't like it was beating you over the head constantly like earlier games did.
Well, one of our favourite games from that era, and we actually did a whole episode last year with Lewis Castle about Blade Runner, which I imagine must have been great fun working on that. But I mean, how did you kind of approach recompiling the soundtrack for the game then? That must have been a big job.
Yeah, that was a dream project for me. I really enjoyed it. It was for the whole studio, I would imagine. But it's one of my favorite movies of all time, and the soundtrack, of course, was one of my favorites because it's so unique as it is. I mean, Vangelis is a genius. So the fact that I got to dabble in that world was a treat, and a bit intimidating, to be honest, because what we had to do was there's a weird thing with music rights that happens sometimes, where you get the rights to use one aspect of it but not another, and that was the case for Blade Runner, where we had the rights to the score, the written music of the score, but not the recordings. So we couldn't utilize the recordings of the soundtrack to the movie, but we could recreate them if we wanted to. So and of course I had nothing to go by. There was no sheet music for it really available or anything like that, apart from maybe some lead sheets. So I basically recreated some of the signature themes from the film by ear, from scratch, sound by sound, note by note. And that was a huge challenge, because we're in the late 90s and I'm trying to recreate something that was done in the early to mid 80s. And so I was basically taking the synthesizer hardware modules that I had at the time and making them sound retro, making them sound like the 80s, counterparts of what Vangelis had used, to the best of my ear and ability. And that was a fun journey to take, because, it's like you kind of get to rediscover through his work, what he was doing and how he put these things together, and the lush effects that was on everything, and how it was performed. I mean, I think a lot of people don't realize that, you didn't rely heavily on sequencers back in the 80s, that a lot of that was actually performed, Yeah. It was recorded, with a live feel, and that's why it's so dynamic and so, organic in that sense. So even though it's synthesizer instruments, it has a very human feel to it. So I just did the best I could to recreate that to the best of my ability. And we did that with the main theme and the credits theme, the love theme, the Blade Runner blues. And man, that was a task. I spent days just on one of those tracks alone to get it right, to get the mix right, the sounds right, the feel right. So I was really proud of that. And what was funny was a lot of people in the studio were commenting that they could notice how much more clarity was in the mix of the sounds, because of, we're using modern technology versus, analog tape of the 80s and all of that. So it was kind of funny.
None of that background hiss.
Yeah. And then, and I got to add some of my own original music to that as well. Albeit I'm certainly not going to say it was on par with anything Vangelis would have done because, I'm no Vangelis. But, as far as capturing the mood and the sound, that's really what I was just trying to go for, to complement that and add the right, mood and setting to the game.
Well, in the mid-90s, I mean, a lot of games kind of moved away from having game data soundtracks to streaming music off CD-ROM. I mean, was that
yes, indeed.
Was that a big kind of benchmark moment? And was that did you feel so free suddenly when that came in?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, it definitely was a big moment because now there was emphasis to make that as good as we could. And so now it wasn't really about me utilizing the hardware synths as a means of coming up with ideas that would then get translated to MIDI. It was about actually utilizing the sounds at hand as the final thing. And so that opened up that world, and then, definitely made us, start getting different kinds of gear that would, be of professional bar quality. And so, when we got into that, it was definitely freeing in the sense that now I can make things sound any way that I want. I don't have to be limited to not only the limitations of MIDI playback on certain systems or consoles, but I'm not limited to the type of sound that I'm using, even or the instrument palettes. I can sample anything. I can bring up any instrument I want. So that part was cool, and so I just experimented from there. And obviously, you have a guideline of what kind of style that you're going to do per game, and you set that, with the team, and then you move forward from there. So then it's very focused in terms of, genre and instrumentation and the kinds of, things that I'm doing from that perspective. But it was an exciting time for sure because, it was great to finally get away from limitations of MIDI playback systems.
Well, when creating Command & Conquer, it was going to be that huge multimedia experience. So I was wondering how you approached the soundtrack. Did you do it like, say, a film score or something like this? Or did you come up with something completely new, a kind of RTS idea of sound?
Well, Command & Conquer, because it was the first of the series, and we were basically just doing something brand new with the sort of direction we'd set already with Dune 2, but now we had a much larger format to play with CD-ROM. So everybody was just so creative on that project and super into it, and really put in a lot of extra effort between doing the cinematics and us doing the audio that would be streamed, and and having this just immersive gaming experience overall. I mean, right from the installation, you're already in. So everything about it was very creative and very forward thinking, and when it came to the music part of it, a lot of that was 100% experimentation. We didn't know what the game necessarily needed to be per se in terms of a music style. So we decided to just go for a lot of different styles and mix elements of things together. We had a meeting, a kickoff meeting sort of in Paul Mudra, our audio director's office, with Brett Sperry, the president of Westwood and the visionary, one of the visionaries behind CNC. And we basically sat there and talked about, what should the music be for this game? And we started just playing a bunch of CDs for each other in this room, just kicking around ideas like, hey, what about, a piece of this song, like this particular part? What do you think of that? Or what do you think about the genre of this band or this artist? What do you think about this one song from this one movie? We just kind of listened to a bunch of different things and put it all together. And I took all of those elements and ideas and I put them on a cassette tape and brought some ideas to the table as well. And they just said, just try it all, try everything. Don't be limited. Don't feel like you have to stick to exactly what we said. Just take these ideas and our discussion and run with it and do whatever you feel like. And we'll try everything, So that's what I did literally. I started writing, everything from techno to metal to hip hop to orchestral to everything under the sun, and then started fusing some of these styles together even. And that really just became what Command and Conquer's soundtrack was. I didn't necessarily expect that a lot of it would work or that it would, all get utilized, but it ended up being that way. And that just kind of added to the charm and the personality of the game.
I know we hear stuff like, Nine Inch Nails and Ministry and stuff in there as well. I mean, were they were they really open to this kind of industrial soundtrack kind of idea as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was, Nine Inch Nails has always been a huge influence for me. And you mentioned Ministry too. I definitely had listened to some of that stuff back then as well. But it was all over the board. I mean, like I said, there was so many influences being drawn up. I mean, besides those bands, like I was into Rage Against the Machine, Vince DiCola, who did the Rocky IV and Transformers animated film in the 80s. He's one of my, all-time favorites. So I brought some of that in. Pink Floyd, soundtracks to like Apocalypse Now and Top Gun and, stuff like that. It was just a wide variety of stuff. Dr. Dre, I was listening to that too. So you throw all that stuff together and I just kind of made a soundtrack of it.
Well, there was kind of different paces for different stages and levels and stuff. And, some of the harder ones, it would get a bit more industrial and it would get a bit more techno-y on one. Was this kind of something you did deliberately?
Not necessarily. So I had composed a wide variety of music, and basically our audio director, Paul, he was in charge of really kind of selecting where these songs were going to be played and what missions they felt the best in. There were certain key themes that I'd written with specific reasons in mind, like the song No Mercy was definitely a nod/Kane theme. Like I used that melody for Kane in all the subsequent sequels. And then also there's a melody in the song Airstrike that's kind of more in association with the GDI, but there was some of the harder themes I would anticipate would be, more intense combat or more villain associated, and some of the more, groove oriented themes, were I think more like in the GDI realm. So, but again, a lot of that was decided a bit later, after I'd already composed a lot of different music. So it was just a matter of, just kind of finding where things fit the best.
And that's kind of a real standard now in modern games, that you'll go into an area and you'll hear a piece of atmospheric music and it will mean that something's going to happen, or it will work and build up the tension.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's so many methods of implementation now. I mean, there's so many different techniques depending on how you want that to affect, the player and the gameplay. So, back then we were really just selecting full themes to play during a level or during, either the start of the mission or during the combat. It wasn't as involved beyond that. But we did have a jukebox mode for people to utilize, especially with regard to multiplayer. We wanted people to be able to choose their own battle music when they were going into multiplayer and have fun with that. And people loved that option.
Well, moving on to Red Alert 2, did you think that the Mighty Hell March would resonate with so many people?
Oh, I had no clue. I really didn't. The story behind that is, I didn't really know what Red Alert was going to be about. All I knew is that we were going to do another CNC game, so I assumed it was going to be a sequel to the one we'd already done. I'd started working on some more music ideas, and I just had like a one of those moments where everything just like aligned perfectly for me. One day I woke up. As soon as I woke up in the morning, I knew immediately I want to write a heavy song to the sound of marching boots. That was the first thing I thought of when I just woke up one morning on my way to work. So I get in my car and I go to work. And the first thing I do is I look for a sample of marching boots, and I find it. And so I'm like, all right, cool. And then I picked up the guitar, and the very first riff I played was the main riff of Hell March. It just came right out. So I was like, all right, this sounds cool. And I ran with that, and I finished the whole song that same day. Like, it was just like from the beginning of my day to the end of the day, complete song done, just flowed naturally, no problem. And I thought this would be kind of a cool badass tune for Nod or something like that, for the next CNC. So after I'd finished it, Brett Sperry came by my office and he said, "Hey, I heard you got a new tune for the next game that you kind of worked on." And I'm like, "Yeah, check it out." So he listened to it and he's like, "Wow," he's like, "This needs to be the main theme for the next CNC." And I'm like, "Oh, sweet." He's like, "But it's not a nod theme." He's like, "It's gonna be we're gonna go back in time and do this whole alternate history thing." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, well, whatever works."
That is like iconic. Now, I mean, it's even like an internet meme, isn't it? It's like,
yeah,
huge.
it is. It's really taken on a viral life of its own over the years.
And there's been a version in every single Red Alert as well, hasn't there? There's like Hell March 3 and Hell March 2.
Oh yeah,
and
yeah, we did. Yeah. Hell March 2, Hell March 3. It's definitely like the signature theme for the Red Alert part of the Command and Conquer series. So I tried to kind of reinvent the song in a new way every time there's been a new game. So, Hell March 2 definitely had a very different feel to it from the first, but still utilizes the same familiar riff. I just kind of, altered the tempo and the feel of it so that instead of a triplet feel, it's a straight rockin' feel. And actually, when I worked on Hell March 3 for Red Alert 3 and I came back for that, of course, at the time I was brought back as one of, several composers. I didn't work on the whole game. They just wanted me for the main themes. But so I originally had intended to reinvent the song again with a whole different feel. But the audio director there felt that they really wanted to kind of keep it more similar to Hell March 2 and just kind of spice it up a bit with an orchestra and maybe just alter it a little bit, but not too much. And I was like, oh, well, okay. So I did that, and I thought, the symphonic element would be kind of fun. So at least that was a new spin to put on it. And we recorded it over at Skywalker Sound with the symphony there, and that was pretty badass. So,
Wow.
But yeah, doing those games was really, really cool. And Red Alert, the first Red Alert particularly, felt like the game that I really honed in on my own style a bit more than I had before that, where I was kind of always in experimentation mode. Red Alert felt like, okay, now I have more of a solid style now there's more of a consistent voice with this.
Well, Frank, you've obviously become like the sound of CNC, and like we were overjoyed last year when we heard the news about that video of the remastering of CNC. I mean, kind of how did that kind of all come together then, and when did you first hear about the ideas, and how did you get involved again?
So this is really an ironic kind of thing because I say the planets must have aligned for Command and Conquer this year somehow, because there's just so much that's popped up not related to each other that are all about that. So it starts off a year ago, a little over a year ago, last January, where I had finally made the decision that I was going to put together a live show of doing the best of Command and Conquer music. And I was going to do it at MagFest, which was, a music and game festival that's, been annual for several years and just kept, building in its audience. And so I'd started planning that already in the beginning of the year. Then halfway through the year, around summer, EA contacted Petroglyph and myself about the idea of doing remasters. They felt that, they really wanted to do it right with the original development team, if it was possible. So that's why they reached out to us. The fans have obviously been asking for EA to utilize us in some capacity with a CNC game, and so they made the move and met with us, and it went really well. And so that's really what kind of got that started. And that was, and it was, I was really flattered to hear that, a big part of, the idea of doing that, because Jim Vasella, the EA producer who's working with us on this, he actually put out a Reddit post before he even announced that, that we were going to do this. He said, "Hey, we're thinking about doing the remasters. What does the community think about this?" And apparently a bunch of them chimed in and said, "You got to get Frank Klepacki back." so that was really flattering. So yeah, that was kind of a given that I was going to, be doing that along with, Petroglyph, since, I work with them. And so that aligned and we got on board and we're working on it now. And then In addition to that, Lewis Castle is doing a game developers conference post-mortem on the original Command and Conquer this coming March, and I'm helping him out with that, putting that presentation together as well, which is also not related. He had no idea that we were, signing on to do remasters at the time he started putting that together. So it was just like, okay, this must be the year for Command and Conquer to make a comeback.
Well, how's kind of it going with the remastering then? Is things progressing well?
Yeah, so far, it's still very early in the stages of that, so there's not really a lot I can say about it at this point other than, we're just really deep in assessing everything about the original, source code and how it all works and how we're going to appropriate that with our modern technology so that, the gameplay is going to feel exactly as it did, but obviously be reworked to, operate on modern OS and take advantage of higher resolutions and things like that. So, and obviously that's going to, in my involvement, being audio director on that, I'm going to make sure that, as much of the audio assets, are going to be higher quality as possible. And then we'll take it from there. So that's kind of where we're at.
Well, you mentioned Petroglyph Games there, and you created the Star Wars Empire soundtracks. This must have been really good fun for you because you're a big Star Wars fan.
Oh, it was the best years right there, man. For me, because that was my ultimate dream project of all time. When we got to work on Star Wars Empire at War, and that was right when Petroglyph started, because Westwood, had been consolidated by Electronic Arts, and I spent about a year and a half just freelancing, and I knew the guys at Petroglyph were forming their studio and looking for their first projects, and that just happened to be the first one they landed. So they knew immediately, hey, we want to get you on board for this. We know you're a huge Star Wars fan. And I'm like, oh, absolutely. Are you kidding? I'm going to sink my teeth into this like you wouldn't believe. And that was just, it was a dream project for me because I got to audio direct and create assets for a world that not only was I familiar with as the back of my hand, but to be really super excited and proud that I've arrived to that point. Getting to go visit Skywalker Ranch and George Lucas's property and the work facilities and his home and all of that stuff. I mean, it's just surreal and having, the original movie sound assets, to play with and put into the game, and going, everything I clicked on, I just had a big smile on my face, like, oh, there's the Chewbacca sounds. Oh, there's the lightsaber sounds. Oh, that's so cool. So I was just like a kid in a candy store. And then, of course, musically, a huge fan of John Williams, goes without saying. It's probably the first real impactful musical experience I can remember as a young kid, because when you think about it, when Star Wars first came out, the first movie, I was like 3-4 years old. So it was actually, I think I was 4 when I saw it the first time because it was on video. I saw it on video for the first time. And as we all know, the very first thing that happens is you see the Star Wars logo flash on the screen and then all that's happening is scrolling text. Now, if you think about that visually, that's not very exciting. Okay. But John Williams' score, that opening fanfare, just hooks you immediately. It lets you know that something awesome is about to happen. And right from that moment, I knew I was in. So that stuck with me all these years. I've always been a Williams fan. So the fact that I got to contribute original music alongside of, his obviously iconic score in these games was a treat for me. But as a fan, I also wanted to respect the property and the story as much as possible because I know it so well. I'm like, okay, if from a fan's perspective, I'm not gonna try to insert myself, in every part of this game. I want to do this justice. I want to do this right. I want to do this the way it needs to be from everybody else's perspective. And from that idea, I wrote themes that were placed in areas of the game that were not related to the films. I thought that was the best decision to make. The best decision was to blend in, not stand out. So, when we went to other worlds or other generic space battles or anything like that, that's where I would take advantage of putting new music that I created. Everything else was Williams appropriate, where it's supposed to be, what moments it's supposed to be for. I made sure all of that lined up, and I definitely accomplished that. I felt, and from the fans' perspective too, they felt the same way. They're like, yeah, this really hits the head on the original trilogy feel of Star Wars, and doesn't. There's nothing that stood out that seemed like it would be awkward. So that was really what I set out to do, and loved every minute of it.
And I think with something like Star Wars, because it's such an iconic and beloved franchise as well, it really helped that you're a fan, because it's the kind of thing you can't get that wrong, can you? No one wants to get that wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And even the producer at LucasArts at the time, we were working with Brett Toasty. He's like, it's really good that your audio director is a huge Star Wars fan. He's like, that's a plus.
Well, also you did some music for MTV for advertising as well. I mean, that must have been a little bit different, and different audience.
Yeah. The commercials were fun. And what was funny was before we got the final voice actors in the game, I had stubbed in a bunch of stuff where I was basically impersonating a lot of the characters, and so in the commercial, we hadn't gotten the final Vader yet. So my voice is actually in the commercial as Darth Vader.
Wow, amazing! You can put that on your IMDb then, can't you? That you played Darth Vader, I guess.
Yeah, for a minute. Yeah, but that was actually part of an even funnier story, which was that when we were working on the first playable level as a milestone deliverable for LucasArts, the audio director at LucasArts didn't get the memo that this was our first delivery of the game. He thought that this was considered a final delivery of the game. So he was listening to everything and going, oh man, he's like, we really got to get you more of the right sounds, and half of the voices don't sound right. And I'm like, half? I had to laugh about that because I was all of them.
Yeah, that's quite the compliment, actually, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I'll take that as a compliment, no problem. So, once we explained to him what the real situation was, he laughed about it. And so it was all funny. But
well, we hear a lot about kind of video games live now, and we've just heard about the Tomb Raider anniversary where they've been doing all the Tomb Raider music live. But I remember back in the day seeing a video of you with a huge red robe and a really funky guitar performing Command & Conquer Live.
Yeah. I was guest appearing with Video Games Live, doing the Hell March themes with them on various dates here and there, whatever ones I could make, that worked out with my schedule. And so the very first time I did it, I dressed up as a conscript from Red Alert and used my signature guitar, which as you described is pretty funky looking. But I mean, it doesn't just look crazy. I mean, it actually sounds really good. I use it on everything I recorded on ever since I've had it made. So I really enjoy playing it, but it just also happens to be a fun showpiece as well.
I mean, you do like Magfest with Frank Klepacki and the Tiberian Sons, which is an awesome name. I mean, will you ever do a world tour, and will you come to Europe, Gamescom, that kind of thing?
Oh yeah, I would love to. In fact, I did get some interest from a European agency up there, so we'll see if they can put something together. Maybe we will make our way up there.
Oh, we've got to make it along to that. We'll have to keep an eye out.
Yeah. So I definitely would like to do more shows with that. That big Magfest kickoff was so successful. I mean, we packed a ballroom full of 5,000 people, and we had just a great stage production. Everybody there was super awesome to work with, the whole crew, and of course, the band, the Tiberian Sons that played with me. I hired them. I mean, I asked them to join forces with me. I don't want to say hired them. I asked them to join me for that specific show because, first of all, they're the ones that told me about it to begin with a few years back, because they had performed at it before themselves, doing their own kind of crazy video game arrangements that are really awesome. And Hell March happens to be one of the ones that they did. I was talking with Tony Dickinson, who's like their band leader, and we'd been in touch for several years, and I mentioned it at the show live, to the audience that he was basically responsible for telling me about it in the first place. So it only made sense, knowing how good that band is, that I was like, you know what, you guys should join me for this. Let's do this together. And then our awesome visuals guy, Nate Horsfall, came on board and just put together a great video wall for us with all of the visuals that he put together for all of the songs. And then, of course, the stage production at MagFest was over the top this year. They brought in lasers, they brought all kinds of stuff. So it looked amazing. So the value that we got for that show was pretty incredible, and the quality of it was as best as I could have expected, and it went really well. So I'm very happy with that. And as a result of that, we have a show that's ready to go for anybody else that wants to book us. So,
well, I think it's awesome seeing video games music being done live as well. And I imagine, in terms of getting the respect that the genre deserves as well, I mean, people seeing it live. I guess, is that something you've kind of noticed over time, that video game soundtracks have been taken like as seriously as movie soundtracks now? I mean, that there weren't maybe previously?
Oh, absolutely. And I started kind of getting the hint of that even years ago. It took me a while to arrive at that, but because I tend to be very focused in my own bubble, like I'm just working on stuff that I love to do, and I'm on to the next project, and I don't really, think too much about, the wider audience that's out there, even though I'm aware of it and I know it exists, but it still just blows my mind when I actually get a chance to interact with fans, whether it's at conventions or at a show like Video Games Live or the one I just did at MagFest, and they just, come out in droves, and I'm just like, man, I was like, this is really incredible and special that, there's like a dedicated audience just for video game music, and it blows my mind still. I mean, and I love it. I think it's kind of like, to me, it almost feels kind of like the new rock and roll, not literally in the aspect of rock music, but literally figuratively in the aspect of that it's a special thing that, is kind of niche, but more wide than even that. And because video games is the other entertainment medium that's in the mainstream for everybody. You can't discount it as a smaller thing. There's music, there's movies, there's video games, television shows, and it's all on par. It's all high quality. It's all creative, and people take those memories that they have of playing these games, and it means so much to them, as much as any other experience that people have. So that's pretty amazing.
I know it's incredible. You've been the soundtrack to so many people's lives and experiences too. That must be really special.
It is. It really is. I mean, especially when I hear a lot more personal stories from people that when they share with me about what was going on in their life at the time. Some people had reunited with their family over video games that they played, whether it was Command and Conquer or whatever. And some people say it was like just the best times of their lives with their friends and having LAN parties, or that it got them through tough times that they were going through personally, whether it was battling illness or whatever, and so, you hear that stuff and you realize that, it's not just impactful as entertainment. It's impactful in that the entertainment provided something much more personal for these people. And so to be part of that, that soundtrack to what they, have as a fond memory is great. It's a really, really endearing.
Well, Frank, long may it continue. I mean, we can't wait to see the CNC remaster as well. That's something we're really excited about. And if people want to keep up to date with what you're up to, I mean, do you have a website or do you tweet or anything like that? People can check it out.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You can go to my website, which is just my name, frankklepacki.com. Or I am also, I have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, official pages. So you can find those pretty easily. So most of my goings on are up there.
Frank, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me, guys. Have a good one.